Could a cure for cancer be closer than you think? Welcome to Live from Stage 4, where metastatic cancer takes center stage as we talk to experts, share inspiring stories, break down groundbreaking research, and shine the spotlight on what matters most. Because when it comes down to it, this podcast is for us, by us, and all about us. Hi, I'm Victoria.
Hi, I'm Abigail.
And we're here together for the first time to introduce this podcast. Abigail, why did you think it was the right time for us to do this podcast? And why are we doing it? And please don't tell people that I forced you into doing this podcast and made you do it because you're my friend and you couldn't refuse.
So if I can't say that Victoria just assumed that I would be part of this, let me say that I'm super excited to be part of a podcast that is specific to the metastatic community and the really unique things that we need and that we encounter and that we think about. But Victoria, why did you decide that now is the right time to bring Live from Stage 4 to the public?
Well, that's a good question, because I guess some of you know that last year I retired from my podcast, our MBC Live, and I meant to stay retired, but I just couldn't because the news out there compelled me to look into what's going on. And I said to myself, we can't not talk about it, right? These federal cuts that are happening around us, and the impact they have on our lives, on the lives of our friends, on the lives of researchers, and our future, make us come back and do it.
Makes a lot of sense, Victoria. And for those of us who have germline mutations, meaning genetic predispositions for cancer that we may be passing along to other members of our family, like our kids, it means that there are far-reaching consequences to cuts to federal research, to understanding the pipeline. But Victoria, what is the thing that is most significant to you about the federal cuts to cancer research?
The uncertainty. I guess I'm not happy with the uncertainty of things. I'm not happy with seeing things changing every day. Every day we get more news. The other day we got the news about the CDC being in danger. Every other day there is something going on and it's not clear what's happening. And also, I feel that we as patients need forum where we can talk about these things because we have a point of view and we know what we want to see and we know how we want to see it. And I don't think there are other platforms that will allow us to talk honestly without any misconceptions or preconceptions. What do you think?
Makes a lot of sense. The end users of all this research are people who are living with or diagnosed with cancer. And that is a particular club that no one wants to join, but there are a lot of similarities across people who have been diagnosed, even with different types of cancer, and how we're really vulnerable and reliant upon a whole lot of other people to make research happen for us so that we have the medication that we need in order to stay alive. So really, at the end of the day, it comes down to a life and death struggle, which I hope it's not too dramatic to say that, but that's the way it feels to me.
It's not. So what do you expect that this podcast will be able to deliver?
I think that patients need to drive research in a way that we haven't had the opportunity to do so yet. We're not biased in terms of making money off of the various medications or various ideas, but we do have a stake in this. We do have, at the end of the day, a really important interest in whether or not medication is going to come through the pipeline in the same way that it has in the past. So I think it's important to hear from all of the different stakeholders, but also that patients are often left out of that discussion. So I think having a platform where patients can speak honestly and publicly about the things that are important to us is a real need.
Yeah, you're right.
I think it's great, Victoria, that you've decided to make it happen.
Oh, thank you so much. And it's great that you've decided to join me. Honestly, I wouldn't do it without you. But anyway, this brings us to the topic of what we're here to talk about, actually, specifically. So, a little backstory. When I started thinking about this podcast, and I just said why I came back, I thought of a single episode. I thought, okay, I will do an episode and I will try to bring different stakeholders, as Abigail said, to the story of budget cuts and how that affects people in different areas. And I have called on my friends and people I know and people I know of and friends of friends, and every single person I reached out to said yes. So at the end, I had 5 interviews from different people, from researchers, young and experienced, from nonprofit and patients. And so instead of just putting all in one episode, we have decided to just put it out there and let the story speak for itself. And we're beginning with the first episode, which is a panel of us, patients, talking about this issue. Research, how it affects our lives, why it's important to us, how we're living with metastatic breast cancer. Abigail and I have talked to our 2 friends, and I have to say, these 2 friends are founding members of the podcast. So, in addition to Abigail and me, and Abigail, of course, needs no introductions, joining us today is Jill Tirabassi, who is a physician, researcher, and advocate. She's living with metastatic breast cancer like everyone else on this panel. She was diagnosed with breast cancer during her second pregnancy at the age of 36. She now works part-time while raising her 2 young sons with her husband outside of Buffalo, New York. She champions the importance of patient perspectives and forming research to ensure meaningful advancements, and is dedicated to making scientific findings accessible to the broader community. She's an advocate with MBC Alliance and is currently creating research partnerships in the MBC space. She enjoys hiking, cross-country skiing, gardening, and is finally getting the hang of cooking. Unlike me, she is getting the hang of cooking.
And rounding out the 4 of us is someone who is newly diagnosed with metastatic breast cancer, Alexis Desai, a born and raised New Yorker and former educator. She's a patient research advocate dedicated to reshaping the narrative for young women with metastatic breast cancer and ensuring patient voices drive meaningful research and policy. Diagnosed with MBC at age 37. So the 3 of us have been diagnosed young, right? So Alexis at 37, Jill at 36, I was 38. Alexis is actively involved with Mediviver and is a recent graduate of NBCC's, that's the National Breast Cancer Coalition's Project Lead. Alexis is passionate about advancing research that fosters meaningful patient researcher collaboration and patient involvement at every stage. Outside of advocacy, Alexis is a diehard Bills fan, proud dog mom, aunt, passport stamp collector, and enjoys Pilates and paddleboarding.
So I'm the old woman among you here.
And I'm the only one not in New York. So, yeah.
Let's get to it. Jill, I'm here with Abigail Johnston to talk to you about your unique experience as a patient and a doctor. I'm so excited to have you here with us. So let's just set the scene and let's talk about your experience with MBC and maybe how your experience shaped your view on how important research is for us people living with MBC.
It's interesting. I think my experience as a physician somewhat delayed my diagnosis of MBC because I knew the odds that I would have breast cancer were very low, given no family history and whatnot. And so I think actually I had convinced myself that the lump that I had developed while breastfeeding was much more likely to be something benign, because that's usually what happens when you get lumps during breastfeeding. And I ignored it for a few months, which was, in retrospect, not a good idea. But when I did finally seek care, the first imaging I had, which was an ultrasound, was read as benign. And I was like, yep, confirmation. Yep, it was benign this whole time. And it wasn't until my next pregnancy developed further and it grew quite large. And I was actually in yoga class, prenatal yoga class, and I couldn't do the arm circles. The instructor up front was like, all right, I want everyone doing these arm circles. You can do it. Push through. And I was like, I just really can't. My arm is not working right. This was like a very crunchy granola prenatal yoga class, like, darn the medical system, boo hospital births, everyone should be midwife or at home. And I was like, yeah, I don't really quite feel that way given risk factors, but every woman to her own. I eventually sought more care and was diagnosed. I think it was a bad thing that I was a physician. I think if I hadn't been, I would have been a lot more anxious and seeked healthcare sooner.
After your diagnosis, how did the treatments help you understand how important the research is? Was there anything in the treatments that you received that had made a difference?
Well,
my first few treatments didn't slow down the cancer. And so I was like, gosh, if these great standard of care drugs aren't slowing it down, then I better start thinking outside the box a little bit. And it wasn't until I didn't really have any treatment response to Enhertu that my oncologist was like, we should probably start looking at phase 1 trials. And so I actually saw the phase 1 trial doc, and this was at Cleveland Clinic. And he was, oh, you still have a few more standard of care. Don't blow those off. The response rate of a phase 1 trial is 5%, maybe, if you're lucky. And so I was, oh my goodness, this is very scary. But it did open my eyes to the breadth of different kinds of treatments out there, new cutting edge things that we've never heard of, or different types, the immunotherapy trials and all that. And then I looked into how a lot of research doesn't actually get done because so few people are signing up for trials, and the enrollment issues are a problem too. And I think there's just so we can go by steps, like all the different voltage drops of why research isn't getting done. We're not able to get to the next level. I think that would be something to think about when it comes to research. But that was really my way in. And I actually was rejected at the last minute for the first trial I tried to get on, and went on to Trodelvy. And that was crazy to me that I was getting rejected. And then I got rejected for the next trial. And I realized that if I have the literacy to be able to look at clinicaltrials.gov and read the inclusion exclusion criteria, know what that really means, truly honestly know what it means, and I'm still getting rejected or I can't get on trials, how is any normal person who does not have a medical degree doing it? And I realized that's really a huge problem too. University hospitals and Cleveland Clinic in Cleveland, Ohio are basically on the same campus, across the street from each other. And the doctors don't know half the time what trials are going on here or there. If the trial isn't offered at your institution, the likelihood that anyone else is ever going to get on that trial is very slim too. So I just kept finding all these roadblocks, and it really made me think about, when I finally felt the time was good for me to step into advocacy, how I can use my clinical experience, my own research experience, to help get others with MBC into trials if they so desire.
That's actually a good segue to what I wanted to ask you. So, as a physician, as a patient advocate, what do you think we can do with all these cuts? What is it that we can do to help move research forward and help our community understand how important research is?
Yeah. I consider myself on bonus time now. I would not be here if it had not been for maybe some of these trial drugs I've been on, but also definitely the standard of care drugs that are only here because researchers worked many years to get them from cell lines to mice to humans, participating in these trials through each phase to get it to the point where the FDA says, yes, that is an effective and safe drug that can be approved for use. And so we have to realize that the timeline for those early phase to getting to humans is many years. They say roughly 17 years for things to get from very early stage to being a real drug. And that's obviously, there's lots of variation within that, but many years. And so with the current cuts, to me, from what I understand, a lot of these basic science, early phase cell lines, organoids, mice, rats, they're the ones maybe getting hit the most because that's what the NIH does well. It funds basic science really well. Pharmaceutical companies in general don't like to start out with those early phase things because it takes so long and they kind of want to maximize their return on investment and revenue. And so if we cut a lot of these early phase things that can lead to huge breakthroughs that are really experimental, so boom or bust, can really just do nothing and be shelved for 20 years before someone else ever thinks about it again. That's what the NIH money needs to be doing to fund those early phase ones. And so when I was at that conference this past spring, I was talking to all those basic scientists, the bench scientists, and a lot of them are, they're really trying to scale back. They're really trying to just work on the one thing that they're getting funded for. They're not being as experimental. They're not taking on postdocs who can help them do more experiments in their labs. They're really just trying to survive in the hopes that in a few years, things will open back up again and kind of like will return to normal. So I think that early research that may not impact me as a patient ever, it might not, it might be the next generation of people who are living with MBC. But we need those things to be going too, because we're not at a cure yet, and I think we all want to be there, and it's going to come from the ground up.
Jill, what was the name of that conference?
It was the Mammary Gland Biology Conference. It was one of I guess there's a whole slew of these Gordon research conferences, and it's very small, and they're invite only, and it's pretty much all the pre-published stuff. So you can't actually talk about what went on in that conference. It's all hush-hush. You don't see the PowerPoint slides. You can't take anything away from it just besides like what you learned. And that was really cool, actually, just from like a professional standpoint. I've never been to a conference like that. It was neat. But it really allowed a lot of collaboration, and people were like, oh, I have a cell line that you could use for whatever you're testing out. I think it was just really nice to see that kind of research network. It put like ego aside and it was very collaborative.
Well, I have to say, this is not my interview, but of course, how can I not insert myself? My story is probably a good example of why research matters. I was originally diagnosed with early stage HER2 positive breast cancer in 2004. Herceptin, that had taken years and years and years to be approved, was not yet approved for early breast cancer. It had been approved for metastatic breast cancer, but it was not approved for early stage. And look what the approval of Herceptin did for us. I was diagnosed with metastatic breast cancer 10 years later, but then Herceptin was already an approved and standard of care drug, and Perjeta had become another drug for HER2 positive patients that wouldn't have been there had I been diagnosed metastatic 10 years earlier. And I was able to get it. And look at me. 11 years later, I'm still here. Obviously, it had saved my life. I wouldn't have been here had it not been for those two drugs that took a couple of decades to get approved, especially Herceptin. So one of the slides that Jill shared with me had a very provocative title: Research Matters, especially for us living on the darker side of the pink ribbon. Another team member of our podcast has joined us, Alexis. So Alexis, what's your take on why research matters?
So it's a very interesting day for us to be discussing federal cuts to science and research, because today is Take Action Day. I don't know if anyone's aware. So we should be contacting our congressmen about not cutting or slashing any funds from science and research from the NIH from the 2026 fiscal budget.
All right, so I have to say for our listeners who will be listening to us probably in September that we are recording this on July 21st. So Call for Action Day has already happened when you listen to it. So we hope that there had been some actions taken since then. Abigail, how about you? Why does research matter?
Research matters because money invested in research means more time for all of us to live. It really is that simple in my mind. I certainly hope that we are closer to finding a cure than I fear. Until that is a realistic possibility for all the many subtypes and all the many permutations of breast cancer, what we have is the next treatment, and then the next treatment after that, and then the next treatment after that, to hopefully buy us sufficient time until we get to the, in all capitals, treatment that would actually get us to the point of not having potentially to remain on treatment. So To me, it's time, life.
Yeah. Now, this is such a good social media clip. Dr. Razavi and others have started some interesting initiative out of Philadelphia. So this consortium is actually quite exciting. And Jill, maybe you can speak on that.
Yeah, I must have seen it on social media. It seems like it's a relatively new nonprofit that is aimed at finding a cure for MBC. It was 3 kind of big academic research institutes coming together: MSK, UPenn, and I'm already forgetting the third because I'm not looking at it.
I forgot the third one as well.
We're really just, I think, trying to be more collaborative, break down some of those silos where people are working on maybe similar things at different institutes and don't know about it, to keep moving research forward. And I think that big multi-center collaborations are a good idea, especially when people are pushing the bounds of treatment. UPenn generally is pretty forward in the immunotherapy areas, and you guys know MSK better than me, so you could probably speak to that. But happy to see more research in the MBC space moving forward, right?
Didn't we see that in COVID, though? I mean, we got a COVID vaccine. Obviously, there are many permutations and issues to some of that. I'm not speaking to that. I'm just thinking the global collaborative effort of people opening up their data, opening up what they were doing. We got to solutions so much faster. And I would love to see more of that.
Let's talk about call to action. What do you think we as patient advocates can do to make Congress and other organizations understand how important it is for us, for our lives?
Well, I think I'll be attending Project Lead with National Breast Cancer Coalition next week. So that is one way to definitely step further into the research aspect as far as being a patient advocate. I also believe that our social media presence is quite big, and really raising awareness in that sense has come a long way. I know hundreds of people that I know on social media that did not realize what metastatic breast cancer even was, now at least have an understanding of that. So we're really starting from the bottom where people have no knowledge. Now, when we go dive deeper into the research aspect and reaching out to other organizations, as long as that base knowledge is there, we can easily sway them and help them understand where we're coming from and why this is so important in the entire cancer community, not just breast cancer, because I do believe a win for one, or an advancement in one cancer, is an advancement for all, and that science and research can be used across many different levels. Besides the research part and funding it, women with metastatic breast cancer need to become more involved and have a way to understand which trials are out there. How do you qualify for them? These are all questions that are so foreign to many new patients that might not be responding to treatment. I think that's something else. And I share that with a bunch of my MBC community friends that are actually, one's at the oncologist today, and she might be going on a trial. She might be going to her next standard line. So these were all questions that we came up with. We looked at every trial that might fit her. But without having a community of support like that, women being diagnosed that don't have this knowledge are completely lost and blindsided. So I think having access to resources and making presence on social media to help navigate this field a little bit better can also be very important.
I was at a cancer conference. I literally was with the basic scientists who don't interact with patients, most of them anyway. I was just, the breast cancer patient there. And I think even within the scientific community, even with the clinical community, let alone policymakers, Congress, like you said, stage 4 breast cancer, metastatic breast cancer, is still wildly misunderstood. I don't think people grasp that you don't just get your chemo and your surgery and your radiation and you're done. They don't grasp that this is, for most people at this point, still a lifelong and terminal illness. Thankfully, there's some subtypes that might be heading to more of a chronic disease kind of treatment algorithm, and that's great, but a lot of them aren't. When I was there at this conference, just like showing them like what my life is like, it was, here's a month, here are all my appointments, here are the different treatment plans I've been on with all these different side effects. I live in 3 months intervals of scans that tell me whether or not my cancer is still responding to treatment. People do not grasp that, and they don't understand that people are still dying every single day of metastatic breast cancer because they think breast cancer is. I remember when I was first diagnosed, a coworker sent me an email that was like, don't worry, 99% of women with breast cancer are cured or whatever. And I was like, he didn't know I was stage 4. But it's just still very, very pink and happy. And I'm glad it is that way for most women and people diagnosed. Right. I alluded to, and then you just talked about that, Victoria, that slide that was the dark side of the pink ribbon. Patient advocates came up with this term, and I think it does really fit because we're kind of the black sheep, right? Like we're the ones still pushing, saying, thank you so much. We're glad there are great treatments, especially for early stage breast cancer, but it's not enough. There's still too many of us getting diagnosed and too many of us dying. So we're going to keep pushing the limits. And so I think we just need to keep pushing forward that we are here. And thankfully, a lot of us are living longer than maybe even 5 years ago, but it's still not enough. And we still got to keep pushing.
Abigail, do you have anything to add to this?
I think both Alexis and Jill have talked about the impact of storytelling and utilizing that tool in speaking with our representatives and members of Congress to illustrate and underline why we're asking and why those things are so important. That is an area where I spend a fair amount of time is talking with various legislatures and health staffers because they don't know what they don't know. And there is still a lot of misunderstanding and misconceptions about the lived experience of metastatic breast cancer. But I would add one more thing. I was invited to attend an event last night, and it was all about people who had survived cancer. There were a bunch of people sharing their stories, and then I was the keynote speaker. It was called a wig bash. An individual philanthropist in our community throws a surprise birthday party for herself every year and turns it into a charitable event. So I drove away from that event with 300 wigs, which now I have to figure out how to disseminate. But it was very kind and it was very sweet. And it was very much this idea that we want to be able to provide people with the dignity of being able to wear not a used wig, but a new wig, and a wig that was specific to them, their ethnicity, their hairstyle, their body type, et cetera, right? Because people with different types of hair can often struggle to get something that looks like their hair. And that's really important for us to be able to have a normal life and, be able to pass for healthy. So I was able to share how I've lost my hair 3 times over the course of the last 8 years, but also just talk a little bit about what is it really like to be in treatment constantly after hearing from various people who talked about, I did 6 chemos. I was telling my husband I should probably count up all of the treatments that I have because it's a big number at 8 years, right? But that experience or that juxtaposition of the people who had these wonderful stories of having survived cancer, having gotten through it, having changed their lives potentially because of that, the juxtaposition with my experience where there is no end, the most comments that I got from people after that talk was, I had no idea that stage 4 meant consistent treatment. Of course, I explained that that's not the same for every single person, for every subtype, for every cancer, but for at least metastatic breast cancer and my subtype, I have to be in constant treatment in order to keep the cancer under control. And so just that piece right there, of all the people who attended that event, to me, that's significant because no, those people are not in Congress voting, but those are people who are going to take that information back to their community. And of course, they talked about the importance of getting mammograms and the importance of following up on routine medical care and those kinds of things, especially since it was predominantly people of color in that room. And even the survivors, though, talked about how there were delays in getting treatment and attributed some of that to some cultural or ethnic assumptions.
Alexis and I met a few months ago at the NBCC Summit, National Breast Cancer Coalition Summit in Washington, D.C. And one of the things that they do at the NBCC Summit was to go on the Hill and talk to our representatives. We did get to talk to one congressman, but for the most part, we talked to aides. And it struck me too, and I don't know, Alexis, if you agree with me, it struck me They were very responsive. They were very interested in what we had to say, but they really had no idea what metastatic breast cancer was, which was surprising to me because NBCC does that every year. I guess we talk to different aides every year. Congress people are still not quite aware of what we're living with and what it means.
I believe your congressman, Jill, or no, the congressman in Rochester, his daughter passed away from metastatic breast cancer. So he was on the Hill. He's been spearheading the Metastatic Breast Cancer Access to Care Act and educating his colleagues as such. But yes, we were on the Hill together. I was split between Connecticut and New York. I did get to meet more in person with congressmen in Connecticut, and everyone was on board. So that was exciting. But then again, I keep track of the Metastatic Breast Cancer Access to Care Act, plus asking not to cut funding, increase funding from the NIH, the DOD. But the Metastatic Breast Cancer Access to Care Act had to be reintroduced in March. And after we were there in May, I think at this point we have about 113 co-sponsors from Congress. So that's been difficult because we got so far in 2024, and now it seems like it's almost not going anywhere. And I hate to say that, but hopefully more advocacy and going to the Hill more. I will be with Metaviver in October.
We'll be on the Hill again, asking for the same exact stuff, more funding for science and research, help save lives. Stage 4 matters. We need more. And the MBC Access to Care Act.
So why don't we end on a positive note, shall we? Let's talk about the future. Are you looking for anything right now that you think will move the needle in the world of treatments?
I do realistically think that second and third lines of treatments, quality of life are going to be at the center of those treatments in the near future. I don't know how far off we are from something that could even make this a chronic disease and confirm that depending on subtypes and all of that. But I'm hopeful that quality of life will be maintained for all future treatments and at the heart of it. And patient advocates can also help make sure that happens.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think this has been overlooked. So I think research that helps with identifying how they could improve our quality of life is very important, especially the dosing initiative is at the center of the patient advocate movement. And I think that's really an important thing that they're doing. Abigail, what do you think?
It's hard to know sometimes what to hope for. Having lived with MBC for 8 years, I have seen things change, but also things stay the same. And so I do think that there are things that are realistic and maybe things that are more aspirational. Generally, seeing clinical trials and our healthcare system become actually patient-centered is something I think there's a lot of people working on, and I would like to see us make a whole lot more progress in actually having the patient at the center, because I've been in 8 clinical trials. I'm on my either 7th or 9th line of treatment, depending on how we count them. I've gotten second opinions, been treated in many different places. And I've never experienced patient-centric care, not once. And so to me, we need to think about funding in terms of research and all of that. But I also think the balance of that is really to focus on and push for things to be patient-centric. Many of those things that we need as patients, like an emphasis on quality of life, that would flow from centering healthcare, centering clinical trials on truly what is important to patients.
Jill, what's your take?
I agree with nearly everything I've heard so far, so I'll come from a different side. I'll come from a little more science side. As we dive into cancer biology more and understand why certain cancers are responsive to things or why there's resistance, for example, postpartum cancers being 50% of young women cancers and why they have poor prognosis, we're finally starting to really dive into the magic that we didn't know. Why did that cancer respond and that one not? And so I think we're really going to be able to personalize treatment plans in the future. I wish maybe it was happening faster and sooner. I think certain cancers that might be responsive to certain treatments, you can't access it now because you don't have that subtype. And I think we need to hopefully be working on shifting that mind frame. I think a lot of these biomarker-based treatments that are really tumor agnostic are going to be fabulous for a lot of people. I see all these things, and I'm hopeful that we'll keep moving that forward and there'll be more options. I think, though, that it's happening a lot slower than I want. I'm hopeful that as we understand the science more and treatments keep coming out, we'll be moving that direction. I will say, when I was at that conference, a lot of the basic scientists are really looking into TNBC and trying to break that apart more. It really is just a basket of people who don't have, honestly, the two ones that matter, estrogen and HER2. There's really no progesterone-based treatment. So try to break that apart and figure out actually the different things rather than just saying you don't have any of the markers. Because it's not true. Immunotherapy tends to work better in that. So I'm excited that's happening. It just, as a current patient, and like all of us here, it's not quite happening as quickly as I want it to for us. And it'll be better for the future, but I hope that we can keep those treatments coming.
I'll add something from myself. I'm looking at two things that I'm really quite interested in. One is dormancy, the study of dormancy, and this may not be specifically for people who are living with MBC now, but it's for people who will be diagnosed with metastatic breast cancer. I want the study of dormancy to continue and hopefully get more funded. And another thing I'm excited about is AI. I hope that artificial intelligence, especially in imaging and interpreting imaging, will make a huge breakthrough in some subtypes of breast cancer, like lobule and others. So I think there is a lot to hope for, and we'll continue trying to move the needle with what we do and what we can do.
You know, today's conversation really drives home why research funding is so crucial. From the challenges many of us face accessing clinical trials, to the vital role of patient advocacy in pushing for change, every aspect of our life depends on sustained research support. It's clear that the future of cancer science hangs in the delicate balance. The NIH and the NCI have been pivotal in advancing treatments that save lives, and we must advocate for their continued support. Thank you to our panel for sharing valuable insights today. And to our listeners, remember, together we can make a difference. In our future episodes, we'll dive into discussions with researchers about what happens when funding stops and with the nonprofits about the ways to protect cancer research. Thanks so much for listening. We're glad you joined us. This episode was hosted and produced by Victoria Goldberg and Abigail Johnston, with invaluable help from Dr. Jill Tirabassi and Alexis Desai. Thanks to Dr. Ellen Landsberger, Martha Carlson, Judy Perkins, and Linda Weatherby for getting this podcast off the ground. A huge thank you to composer James Burrows for the beautiful original score. We're grateful he shared his talent with us. If you enjoyed this episode, please visit our website at livefromstage4.org. Share it with a friend and follow us on social media for updates. We appreciate you tuning in. Take care, and we'll see you next time.